cement walls that are 4 feet thick, cold to the touch, in maze-like organizations such that you must walk through them, stepping forward and then turning right, and then turning left, and then turning left, and then right. And only then are you within the inner rooms. Inside the rooms are a slab of concrete, and on this slab of concrete, scientists conduct their experiments. And these experiments are ones that are done with explosives. The reason for the maze-like walls, I am told, is that should an explosive unintentionally go off, the scientist who is in the room will not survive, but the blast will not carry into the rest of the facility. I am touring the Lawrence Livermore National Laboratory. About 10 years ago, I was, of course, the minister out in Livermore. Livermore is known for its national laboratory, and every 4 years, there was a Friends and Family Day, and I got invited by some of my congregants to tour this laboratory. And it was a fascinating experience, a highly curated experience, I will say. Almost anything that could be remotely considered important to the operation of the lab or to national security was removed from our pathway. And we were told to huddle together as we walked through these hallways. And only when we got to the basement of one of the buildings did we find those maze-like structures in which we would walk in and see the rooms where the explosives were created. There was another really interesting image that I have of that experience, which is this huge metal ball, and you could walk inside of this ball, and there was a lifted metal platform, and they would actually put the explosives in there, lock up the ball, and they could test the blasts. How strong those blasts would be tested within that structure. And then as we were leaving, sort of as an afterthought, we're walking towards the gates now, prepared to go about our days to finish up with this tour. And we were told that there was an opportunity to have our pictures taken. And there would be a particular thing that was in that picture, actually 2 things that would be in that picture that these tourists were able to have taken with them. Big boy and little boy. The bombs that were dropped on Hiroshima and Nagasaki. Lawrence Livermore National Laboratories is, of course, the sister laboratory to Los Alamos, where the atomic bomb was created through the Trinity test. And these were some of the prototypes that were on the Livermore lab property. And I'm thinking today about that experience of receiving that invitation to have a picture taken with those bombs, and how there's something obscene in that. There's something obscene in having your picture taken with something that created such suffering and massive death, such national trauma for the Japanese, that they are still living with the effects of it so many years later, in terms of history, in terms of family, in terms of people who were lost, connections that were broken, the pain of that being so real and then so removed on that bright, sunny day, walking around California, walking around the national labs, and all you see are these 2 hunks of metal. I mean, they're not much more than that. I'm thinking today about the ways that sometimes when we see a picture, what is framed within that picture allows us to ignore a lot of things that are left outside of that picture. And so that seemed to be so much the experience there, that you could have your picture taken with these particular things and then not see, and in fact obscure, so much of the suffering that was caused by those things that were in the picture, what's left out of the frame and what is included in the frame. Such an important question. And it was a question that came up to me as well this summer as I went to see Oppenheimer. How many here have gotten to see Oppenheimer? Good, a good number of people, right? I thought it was a really good film in many ways. I found it to be very provocative, really interesting. I thought that much of the moral quandary that Oppenheimer was contending with was made vivid and intense. And I could see sort of the reasoning that allowed him to start to think, okay, the creation of the atomic bomb through the Trinity project that was done at Los Alamos, and who made those prototypes that then made their way to California for that day that I was there so many years later. Part of what was motivating that was intelligence, that the Nazis had access to science and to scientists, and that they were going to achieve the creation of the atom bomb first, which would have been a terrifying prospect. But then in the course of the film, you start to see some of that initial reasoning deteriorate. The war is won, and yet Oppenheimer and his team continue to work on the creation of the bomb. There's a severe lack of clarity around whether there was any necessity beyond just the wish to demonstrate the power of those bombs in their dropping on Hiroshima and Nagasaki, and the evil in that, which is so almost unspeakable. By the time that those bombs are dropped, the sort of legitimate moral considerations that may have gone into their creation is much, much more obscure. So I feel like the film does a good job representing the progress of that and then the complexity around the moral decision making. But one of the things that it does that I had a real problem with is that that film chose not to show certain things that I think would have made for a fuller picture of what the moral consideration was and what it would have been. There were no images in that film of what happened in Hiroshima and Nagasaki. They chose not to represent that. They chose not to show it. And there was this way in which what the film chose to show, I think, lent itself to a feeling that Oppenheimer was a sort of tragic hero. I think that he was, a morally compromised hero, but ultimately, the film was sort of taking the side of its protagonist in many ways and sort of setting him up to be this kind of hero who had made complicated decisions, but nonetheless had done the right thing in many ways. I think that is a challenging, that perspective is problematic. And I think that perspective is problematic because it chose not to show the results of his work. It sort of had these brief allusions to it. At one point, he's speaking to a crowd and they're celebrating the dropping of the atom bombs. And he sort of sees as this vision of the skin melting off their face. That is like the one inkling of what the damage that he had been, in many ways, deeply responsible for what it had wrought, and then it didn't show anything else. The decision about what we include within a frame and what we leave out of a frame, what we choose to see and what we choose to obscure, what we choose to ignore, what we choose to witness within an image that is shown to us, and then what we choose to cast aside. I think that this is such an important moral question. Judith Butler, in her book Frames of War, writes the introductory essay in there about whether the camera can be considered a weapon. Is the camera a weapon? And what she means by that is not that sometimes people pick up a camera and throw it at somebody else, which you could do. What she means by that is that what you choose to see, what you choose to show, what you choose to represent within images, and then what you choose to leave out, very much is marshaled in the service of violence and destruction. And oftentimes war chooses to show certain heroic actions, right? And then it will leave out the results of those actions, the suffering that is caused by those actions, the pain and devastation of what those actions had wrought. What does it mean to be a morally awake person? What does it mean to have a moral conscience that is alive and attendant to all of the complexities and pains that are within the world? We cannot possibly witness everything that's happening in the world, nor should we. If we walked around with that all the time, our hearts would be so burdened that they would break and we would be immobilized. The invitation in this, and the invitation that Judith Butler invites us to witness, and the invitation that I think we can find as people of faith, people who are deeply concerned about the moral issues in our world, is that we can look at the frame and then question what has been left out of it. We can ask ourselves, what is this representing and what is not being shown here? Rosh Hashanah means the head of the year. And in the biblical interpretation or the biblical word for Rosh Hashanah is Yom Teruah. And Yom Teruah means the time or the day of shouting. Just as Deb mentioned, the time of shouting. It is the time of awakening. It means wake up. It's time to turn to a new time, a new way to be together. There's an invitation within the Jewish High Holy Days, an invitation to attend to the transgressions that we have made, to the ways that we have fallen short, and then an invitation to turn towards a fuller, more robust, more complex way of being in relationship with those who are around us and in relationship with the experiences that we witness out in the world. And so what if we took this time, took this invitation as an invitation to wake up your conscience. Notice what it is that you have left out of the frame, whether that is the particular stories or images of people that we choose not to see because instead there's a neater, sunnier image that has been framed for us, or whether it is something about our environment and our larger world that we are missing right now because we are choosing just to shut down our perspective and pay attention only to this moment. Wake up. Wake up. turn towards a new year, turn towards a new way of being with one another such that our conscience is awakened and we have a fuller and more gracious way of being in this world so that we can witness more justice in our relationships, more goodness and kindness in our world, so that we can come more alive with each other. The beauty of being not an isolated individual, but an individual who is in community, who is considering these ways that we awaken our conscience in community, is that community is always inviting us to look for the ways that we are missing certain perspectives. We enter deeply into relationship and conversation with others so that they can help us see the ways that the picture that we have framed in front of us is not the full one, and the invitation to see beyond it lies before us. My spiritual companions, may you have a happy new year. May you bear witness to this day of shouting.